Sarah, I'll make you a co-host in case I have random internet difficulties. Okay, so I'll call us to order and the add to the agenda the minutes from last time. So if anyone has any additions or corrections on those minutes, let me know. I don't have them linked there, but let me find them for you all and share that link as well. Deborah was kind enough to put those together for us. Okay. Any comments there? Okay, if not, so our main thing tonight is just to have a discussion of any additional indicators that people put material together on since the last meeting, or if people have additional suggestions, since Dr. Powers is with us tonight, we can discuss those as well. And if Dr. Powers, if you have some that you want to have under discussion, let us know. I think we talked about 3 main areas last time. One of them was basically college counseling and preparation. And Carol Deely and Troy Kilbrands were going to work on that one. And I think Carol said that they decided not to, and that it was covered sufficiently in the existing framework for professional practice evaluation. So that I think is not really on the table. And I would agree with that because actually either 20% or 25% of the professional practice is covered under competency C, which is building a culture focused on college and career readiness. So that actually gets a pretty significant chunk of the principal evaluation as it is. And they go into a fair amount of detail on that and have actually a couple key behaviors specifically for high school principals. So I think that is one area that is covered in a fair amount of detail in competency C. So the other 2 that we talked about in more detail last time, one was culturally responsive teaching and leading standards. And the other was basically like the idea of an equitable hiring plan. So they're both in the same document. For everyone. Wow. And so, Sarah, do you want to share the document for everyone to see it? Maybe I should be.
Sure. Give me a second.
I mean, you're, yeah, I guess covering it all. The secretary, the doctor.
Yeah, let me share that. I'm so used to doing Google Meets that let me make sure I can still do the minutes while I'm sharing. So give me a
Thanks. So to remind everyone about this one, the idea was to basically draw from the state's new set of culturally responsive teaching and leading standards and structure essentially like an additional competency that would also have key behaviors, just like the existing ones in the principal evaluation. And so that's kind of what we try to do here. And the teaching and leading standards have, I think, like 58 different behaviors altogether. So this was just sort of a selection of ones that seem most relevant to what the school's already working on in terms of the equity initiative and the things that are sort of highlighted with those priorities. And the idea would be to like give it some, weight that puts it similar to what some of the other basically competency areas are. So for example, on the competency E in the professional practice rating, that's relentlessly pursues self-disciplined thinking and action. And there's one standard under there. And then there's like 6 key behaviors. Those add up, I think, to 10% of the professional practice rating. So, and then in the final rating, the professional practice rating is only 50% of that. Student growth is the other 50%. So something like this competency E is worth 5% in the end of the total rating. So the idea is that if we had something along these lines, you could assign it a weight similar to something else that's already in the whole system. And then you could adjust, because the actual online tool for the principal evaluation doesn't really have a place to add these in, just a place to record them. I think the way you adjust it in the end is that when you make your final summative score, you could put it in there. But you could basically probably just incorporate it into the professional practice rating, and it could be part of just another competency instead of key behaviors that the LSC looks at when they're doing professional practice. So Michelle disappeared and now I'm adding her again. Yeah, so that would be basically how something like that would work. I don't know if people have specific feedback. Dr. Powers, do you have feedback on this one? Yeah.
Well, clearly that is something we're placing emphasis on. And as you indicated, Cassie, some of the things that we're doing with regard to our various equity initiatives going back to last school year and carrying on through the future to the present. And that would include some of the things we're doing in our MFT planning and so forth. So as a separate criteria or a separate point of evaluation, it does fall well within some of these other competencies. I don't necessarily see the need to pull it out as a separate one, simply because it will, presumably we'd be talking about, it would be reducing the weight, as you indicated, of like competency E, for example. Whereas actually I feel like it fits well enough within that and in other places as well. I agree that the competencies the CPS provides for are fairly broadly worded, and they do bleed into each other. They're, some of them are mutually supportive and things can fall within both, but certainly that's something we're working on now. And if people want to consider that as part of any one of these other competencies, it would make perfect sense. But I don't see the need for a separate identified competency, as long as people know that that's something they're considering as part of it.
Anyone else have feedback on that?
I guess my question is, Cassie, did you feel, because you put this one together, I did not, or I think you did. Can you give a little background on why you chose these specific ones? Is it something that you felt that you wanted to add more weight to, or just to highlight the work that the school is doing so that the whole community has a better understanding of this, or I'm just looking for some like background on that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, especially within the existing key behaviors, like there's 28 of them, there's really only one that really looks especially at equity and diversity, I think, that's E16. And I think these are just things that sort of pattern with, they're sort of the most important components, I think, of the equity initiative priorities. And like Violet really highlighted last week, the students as co-creators one, and it's kind of then puts the emphasis on the student experience. The thing about any additional indicators, is that then if you're working on stuff, essentially that means that it's not just brushed into the other key behaviors, and it really gets the weight that it deserves. And so like if there is a school project on X, then it really shows up in those, in the whole evaluation, instead of just, maybe falling under, oh, well, we have one priority in the CIWP and there's 2 key behaviors related to CIWP. So like if actually this is your, key focus of school resources and energy in a year, which it seems like the equity initiative and the culture and climate stuff is, that plan is a really important part, then you're actually making sure that that work is being credited to the principal when you do the evaluation. So yeah, I mean, so like, for example, G10, that is something that is, I think, specifically in as one of the sub points under the equity initiative. And the D3 kind of goes along with that one, and also the student voice aspect of the equity initiative priorities. So yes, that was sort of a summary of that.
Well, certainly, those are all things that, like I said, that we're doing and we're aspiring to, and are actually implementing. I think I tend to look at the competencies that are provided as approaching it from a more holistic manner. In other words, looking at this as, yes, there are specific areas that can be clearly identified within each of those, but then there are other things that just, they fit into it in a more of an umbrella type of way. So again, looking at that more holistically, I don't know that there's a need to have a, separate set of bullet points, for example, but I understand your viewpoint on that. I just don't know that it's necessary to add on specific things when we're doing those things and they do fall under the umbrella of the other 5 competencies.
Raquel?
Yes, thank you. So I actually have a question for D3. Who will be monitoring that? And, how will that be weighted? If we have 1,900, I think 65 students, and say only 3 people, come forward and engage with the administration on this, so are you just going to base it on the few students that actually do participate in this, or how will this be weighted?
There's other similar key behavior things in the current competency. So, we do, the student rep does a student survey. And so you get some feedback that way. And, with all of these key behaviors, the LSC gathers a whole array of evidence, or asks the principal to provide a whole array of documents and data. And so we look at those and, to the best of our abilities, we evaluate whether we say, strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree, and, rate those as a group, and come up with essentially an average rating over LSC members. And then you average that for a particular competency. So, everyone brings their own evidence to bear as well as LSC members. But then we also, have a set of documents, and I think it's made clear at the beginning of the process that you need to have facts and evidence to back up whether you strongly agree or disagree. So that's how those work. So it's not really a matter of, so I think when you have a noun phrase like students, that you are implying that it should be students as a whole. And so, consistently soliciting input from 5 students is not enough in a school of 2,000. So, but it's up to the evaluators to figure out whether that's happening.
I can't raise my hand. I'm sorry. I just want to say, like, I think it's consistently solicit, so that could be, um, either he's soliciting it through the classrooms or through the department chairs, um, about input about the curriculum. It could be looking at a quarterly and, survey. It could be a focus group. I think there's a myriad of ways. Thanks.
Yeah, so let's talk about I think the other one as well. And then we can have a more general discussion about whether either of these, we are going to pursue these or not. So
Yeah, Raquel, did you have one more question about this before you?
Yeah, I guess I just want clarification that, he will be rated on his attempts to make this happen, not on how willing the student body is to participate, correct?
yeah, I mean, I think something like soliciting student input is a rating of what the principal is doing, not a rating of what the students are doing.
No, I understand that. I just asking what you plan on doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's that's a case for any of the existing competencies that talk about and mention students as well, right? So
Okay.
I think that's not really like a specific problem to this, but if it's a shortcoming, then it's a shortcoming that sort of plagues the entire professional practice key behaviors. So which are not, they get modified every few years. They aren't necessarily like the best system ever for evaluating, but that's the system that LSEs are given. So that's what we must use. Yeah, so Sarah has one here to refresh everyone's memory. Last week, we looked at a sample indicator that was used at Bell, where they were basically focusing on like behavior and discipline. And the LSE really wanted to make sure that the principal is getting credit for the work being done on restorative justice, and, really put it into a very concrete plan where it's like basically meeting these steps is what the evaluation consists of. And so this one's sort of modeled on something like that. So
Yeah, and I'll just give a little background. So we've talked about hiring a lot, and I know there's hiring happens all the time at a school as large as Jones, and I think that there's a lot of good things that are happening, and I just don't think it's consistent from what I hear throughout the building as far as what people know, how people conduct their interviews, and the questions they're asking, and like kind of ensuring that it's meeting the CPS equity framework. And so I think an assessment just needs to be done, and to codify like the good things that are happening, keeping in mind the CPS equity framework. So the beginning in the first like box is just kind of like a setting it up for reviewing it, and by keeping it in mind the key elements from the equity framework, and then also making sure there's like an annual review and training. And so I put together these next steps, and so this reads to me is something that's very attainable to do if these steps were followed. And the reason I feel kind of strongly about this one is that there has been some feedback from people that have been interviewed and not hired on Twitter, and then there has been some other feedback from the staff that I think it would be nice to codify it so that they felt like the whole school was on the same page with equity. So my first thing was like gathering and documenting the existing processes throughout the building, and present those findings, and then identify a team that would just look at like what the district is doing. The district is supposed to identify district targets for hiring and retaining Black, Brown, and Indigenous staff. Is it appropriate for Jones to have one, or maybe it's not appropriate? Just kind of exploring that. And then ensuring that the hiring teams are diverse, equitable, and inclusive. I think that's a really big challenge, especially if you're trying to fill a position quickly, but how to make sure that happens. You know, when we read resumes, you know, are there ways to use technology to remove some of our implicit biases that we have, so we can put people on a more level playing field, and perhaps CPS has some of this. You know, and then once those findings are reported, then it's a comprehensive process where you could complete training, you could codify it, and then you could measure retention, right? So like the goal is to keep people around as long as you can. It saves you a lot of energy and training people, saves you time and money as if you can keep people for longer and keep them happy. If they're happy, then you're doing something right. If you have people leaving all the time, there's something wrong with the culture. I'm not saying that's happening right now. I'm just saying it's something to think about. So do we measure retention of staff 2 years after hire, 5 years after hire, 10 years after hire? Like, how are we mentoring our staff and things like that? So I know that equity is part of the principal evaluation, but as far as like a specific codification of a process such as hiring, I think it could really pay it forward for the school in the long term. So that's why I wanted to add it.
Thanks, Sarah.
Dr. Powers?
Yes, well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your expressions on this. We have had a what I would consider to be a combination of the art and science of interviewing, screening, interviewing, and hiring. We network a great deal. I was a personnel director in a large district, hiring lots of people, and we used everything from highly stylized things like Ventures for Excellence and various other instruments that are designed to, you know, make sure that everybody, you know, checks off various boxes, all the way through just trying to find out more about individuals and asking them key questions and so forth. And also what we've done here at Jones, and I've always done with where I've been principal, is to have the individual departments focus on well, we obviously do the recruitment, we do everything in terms of getting the word out and gathering and distributing applications, but having each department create their own interview team, and that interview team then carrying through the process of having this. Again, if it's during school, obviously sometimes in the summer you can't do this. Having the candidates teach a sample lesson, a guest lesson, and things of this sort, and then make their recommendations. We also go through a pretty significant process with regard to reference checking. So I think it's a valuable thing. I see that you asked a question about the exit interview, Cassie, and we do that. We provide that for people who have left. We typically have only had 1 or 2 people leave each year. This year we had quite a few people leave for a lot of different reasons, mainly to move out of the city. In fact, I think all but maybe one of them did move out of the city for various reasons. So we do an exit interview. We do questionnaire for them and ask them for their feedback on that, and then use that as part of our hiring process, especially if it's things we have control over. So we're definitely doing a lot of these things. Now, are we checking in on people on a regular basis to see where they are? Our retention, with very few exceptions, is 3, 4, 5, 6 years. In fact, most people who are with us, other than a few people who leave because of a relocation or something, they tend to be with us for quite a while. And almost everybody that's here now, about 85%, are people that have been hired, essentially while I've been principal. So I don't want to be, I definitely want us to focus on trying to find out more about why people leave, why people stay. We're doing that, and trying to make people feel like this is the place they want to stay. At the same time, I want to make sure that we give our teachers in each department and their interview teams some flexibility in terms of how they go about their interviews. The questions that they asked are fairly standard. And then they also trying to get to know these people fairly well based on a few interviews. And of course, interviews are always done by an administrative team as well. So, you know, I don't disagree with all of this. It's just that it's a real checklist of things. And if we don't quite check off one of these boxes, what does that mean? Does it mean we didn't do it? Does it mean we didn't try? Does it mean that it just didn't have any great value? Or I don't want to create a system that's too mechanistic, too much of a checklist, if at all possible.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of like, would there be a compromise where there at least be the assessment, not necessarily that you have to create like a, like you said, like you want some flexibility, but I would love for there to be an assessment and say we have everything's great and everything we're doing is great. With respect to, I mean, I don't know if you're talking to your the district at all as far as their goals that they have to set for their targets, and have they ever approached the school to talk about hiring targets?
How do you define hiring targets?
Well, it's just in the CPS equity framework. They say that they, you know, identify just they have targets for hiring and retaining Black, Brown, and Indigenous staff, but they're not asking the local level schools to do that or provide any data for them. I'm just talking out loud.
Okay. Well, I mean, for this particular hiring year, and again, because we had more than we normally have, we have put a great deal of emphasis on trying to have a more diverse, not only a diverse pool of candidates, which is hard to control the pool. In other words, they kind of come to us. It's hard for us to go out to them, but we certainly do make every effort to spread the word, I guess you might say, and advertise all our positions. But the results have been, we have 13 new professional staff that have joined us, the majority of whom are either African American, Hispanic, or Asian. Of the 10 that were people we hired, as opposed to 3 people that were assigned to us by CPS, 6 of those 10 are either African American, Hispanic, or Asian. So we do have a pretty good representation, and that at least shows up when you have a large enough number that you can actually quantify it. If we're hiring 2 people, it's kind of hard to come up with statistics for that, other than you either have 100% or 50% or 0%. Those are about your only breakdown. And I did share information on our new staff. I was a little delayed because I didn't get all the information I needed from the new people, but I shared that out earlier today with the LSC members, and that'll go out to the community as well. Other than just their names, it's information each person is provided, plus a photo so you can see who you're talking about, and so forth. So we've made a tremendous amount of effort in that area, and I think we've had a great deal of success. And the obverse of that is retention. I do think we have to be careful as to why people do leave. People leave for a lot of reasons. Some people leave because of residency issues. They really don't, they can't continue working in CPS because either they live outside the city or they have moved outside the city. So these are all things that through our exit process, we try and determine to see if there are any patterns like this. And I've done this off and on in informal ways for years. It's just we seldom get that many leave at one time.
Yeah, so I think Sarah's point on some of this is that if you're doing this stuff anyway, then it will only be to your benefit in the evaluation process. I know that, one of the the 4 priority areas in the equity initiative that was created a year ago was related to hiring and retention. So it was Jones must develop a plan to better support and retain its teachers of color. It also must review its hiring practices to increase the number of teachers of color so that it is a better reflection of students they service. And so Mr. Mitchell has been giving us updates on those. So here is, here, if I can give you guys, I've been tracking this stuff in a document that I share with the LSC. So numbers 13 and number 20 on here are basically the same topic. And the updates from 13 really is that, you know, so there was a hiring committee formed and it was met in February. Then there wasn't an update the next month. There was discussion about whether the hiring committee could be part of EPLC. And then there was not really another update in the September equity report. And so, you know, there's sort of these general statements that each department has made an intentional effort to hire a person of color, blah, blah, blah. But there's not really, you know, the focus this year is to develop a plan. And so it seems like something like this, where it just sort of outlines the very most basic steps of creating a plan, would be very helpful, since Mr. Mitchell says that that is going to be something the school's undertaking anyway. So I'm not really, especially because the key behaviors and competencies in the professional practice right now really do not touch on hiring or retention in any really very detailed way. You know, like there's, you know, providing professional development, instructional coaching, like B14. But I wouldn't really say that it, especially from an equity lens, really talks about this. So that would be why I would be really interested in seeing something like this as part of the principal evaluation, especially if the school is planning to take it on in any case. So I think it really illustrates that it really is a priority for the administration, and you know, if there's already been success this year, then really just codifying that and making sure that every department has had the same success. I think that's what, you know, this gathering and documenting existing hiring processes would be about, and to make sure that, you know, good practices are spread, and, you know, you really look at the data, and that data will drive what other departments are doing if not everyone is having the same success. And really looking back and seeing, like, you know, maybe a certain percentage of staff leave every year, but is that percentage disproportionately teachers of color? And also really looking into, you know, the root causes of why people have left, I think is meaningful and helpful for all of this. So.
Well, I don't disagree with that, Cassie. My only concern is this is some very highly specific steps. You'll do this by this date, you'll do this by this date, you'll do this by this date. This particular goal is something that's part of our the equity areas of emphasis. And we can certainly incorporate that in this. However, I would like us to develop our own. The reason we have not is, quite frankly, we've had one heck of a lot of other things going on. Dr. Fay originally was the person that chaired this. He left in the middle of last year. We were getting ready to reopen school hybrid, then reopen school here in the fall. And in practice, what we did was to go full steam ahead to make sure that our practices as far as hiring were really focused on trying to get the very best people we could, and people who were representative of our student body as well. And I think we were quite successful on that. Now, we can go back and look at these processes and make them part of that equity initiative, because it is one of those areas. As a separate area of evaluation for the principal, I feel like there are so many things that you could pull out literally an infinite number of different criteria different points of evaluation. I would rather just take this and make sure that we are moving forward with it as part of our equity initiative. And then if you feel like, if the LSC feels like that we haven't gone far enough on it, then that can be their point of evaluation. We also can potentially incorporate some of this into our next cycle of the CIWP, which will of course be starting this school year in terms of preparing for the next 2-year cycle, unless CPS changes the process, but I don't anticipate that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not married to any of the language in here. This is how my brain works, and this is how I think of, like, if I were going to be evaluating a process, I would start by doing an assessment and gathering data and doing all that kind of stuff. I'm not married to any of the dates. I do think it belongs in the CIWP if the equity initiative is already there. But I think so the equity part of CIWP isn't the whole equity plan.
Right.
And so, like, amending the existing CIWP to put this in there doesn't seem like the right place. However, like, deliverables are so important. And so, although I empathize with how busy you guys are, and especially with reopening and all of that, I still would like to see some movement and not some. I don't want to come back in April or in May doing the evaluation in April, I'm sorry, and say, oh gosh, the last update we had about hiring was February 2021. Just because it just doesn't become a priority because there's no accountability, you know? And so if you think there's a way to put it as part of the equity plan and have some goalposts, I think that could be a good compromise. It doesn't have to be all of these points. I think minimally getting an assessment done, so you know what's going on, regardless of what you see is going on, but like, so you have a real sense of what's going on with data.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of the intention of these discussions, is that it is a collaborative effort for both the principal and the LSC to put these indicators together. So, I mean, we certainly, if there's any area that you think is a priority that the school is working on, that would be helpful as an additional indicator, we are certainly open to that. I mean, so if there was an additional indicator that was essentially about the equity initiative plan and those 4 priorities together, I think that would be something that the LSC could be amenable to. And certainly the next steps that the administrative team could draft those next steps. So that, you know, I think that's really how these additional indicators are supposed to be developed. There's supposed to be a collaboration among the LSC and the principal. So to make sure that the evaluation process actually reflects the priorities of the school and what the school is working on and what the school holds as sort of the key goals in a year. And so, you know, clearly last year was very interrupted by the pandemic and remote learning. And so, you know, the key goals of the equity initiative were not necessarily all addressed and to the degree that the administration would have liked. But I think thinking of this year, this is the point where there should be some plan. And so given also that there's the MFT work and the OST work and that plan, that's another thing that if that's the focus of the school, that could be incorporated. And, you know, so that I think it is a very, you know, there's an infinite set of things that could be included, but the point is to understand what the school's priorities are and what your priorities are as a leader of the school, so that it reflects that, so that we are fairly evaluating, you know, what you actually want to work on, because it is a very canned list that we get from CPS, right? And so I think adding something to that is directly relevant to the school's goals is what should be, you know, the point of this. So if there's not really any particular priorities that the administration has, or that you have as a focus this year, then maybe it doesn't make any sense to add any additional indicators. But it seems like if there's a vision for the school and where the school is going, and what's really the focus of what's being tackled, that's what we want this additional indicator to reflect. But since, that very much depends on the principal's leadership, it should be something that you have buy-in to. So, if there's a different topic other than the ones that we described here tonight, or the college counseling one that was sort of discussed and rejected, we'd certainly be open to that. Like, we have till November 1st. So that is just, I think, the framework that we should be looking at, which is essentially what I actually explained to the group last Tuesday as well.
Okay. Okay, well, I understand where you're coming from on that. Again, I'd like to caution, though, that looking at the overall competencies for evaluation, unless there are specifics added to it, the implication that there's no vision or no plan or no goals for the year, I think is a little bit of an overreach. But we will certainly, I'll discuss this with my team because we work together on these things, particularly with regard to, and this is where I'm thinking that perhaps utilizing the equity framework that we developed almost a year ago, really, it was a year ago, and how we can bring that up to date and where we are, because much of what we're doing, that's part of the MFT planning, part of the, well, so much of the other, you mentioned, for example, the college and career portion of it is definitely part of our MFT. It's one of our best practices areas of the 3 that we selected. But those are not exclusive things. I mean, there's so many more things going on. To try to quantify each of those is going to be, there'll be more work put into quantifying them than actually doing them. And that's my concern right now is we add on more things that we're already doing and have to come up with ways in which how do you fit this into a checklist or so forth. But I will talk to my team about it and discuss particularly the idea of the equity framework and how some of these things can fit as part of that. For example, the issue of hiring. And I always felt from the very beginning, the term hiring team was a misnomer. It was really to study retention and essentially job satisfaction as opposed to hire people. That's why we've continued to involve the teachers to the greatest extent possible, which I've always done as opposed to a top-down process. But I can understand and appreciate the idea of maybe greater consistency or greater some structure within the processes that we have been using, certainly so that we're touching on the bases that we need to touch on. So yes, certainly discuss about that with my cohort here and see if we decide to make that part of this or simply make that as organic within the 5 competencies. The LSC has the authority essentially to evaluate me any way they wish within those competencies and to really technically add anything to that. In other words, read into each competency the total package of what is going on in the total view. So I look at it more holistically than specific topics, because if you try to get too specific, like I said, you can drive yourself crazy coming up with lists of things. And, I don't know how productive some of that is, but I've certainly got an open mind on this and I would like to discuss it with my people here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking more like as a professional, I set goals for my business for the year. I'll set goals for myself. And so maybe I'm thinking of it more as that, like and it doesn't necessarily have to be part of the principal evaluation as an additional indicator, but I think it would be helpful for us to know what those goals are. And, for your goals for the year, but in very specific terms. I mean, not where your feet are being held to the fire, but where there are deliverables that you expect to do by the end of the year. And if you don't meet them, you do an update. I mean, that's what the CIWP is all about, is you set these goals, you can modify, you can amend the CIWP because maybe it didn't fit what you thought it was going to happen when you do it in the school. I'm looking forward to next Tuesday to see the update. And I'm not sure if there have been amendments to the CIWP since it was initially done, but like that, it's never too late. You can always amend it. It's a living thing. And I know that some years, I mean, even my experience in schools, some years for 2 years you have a great CIWP and you're really, really working. And sometimes it's kind of a dud. And like, there's only one thing that really, oh, you raised your hand, Cassie. Okay, go ahead. Couldn't figure out how to raise my hand.
Yeah, I mean, so certainly for simplicity's sake, it is the simplest thing just to use the CPS competencies. And I think in terms of fairness, part of the reason, like certainly my motivation is that we are not really supposed to widely read the competencies and the key behaviors in a way that however we wish. And so it certainly says in the school code and the principal contract that we can use whatever additional indicators we wish. But the way CPS has laid it out is that additional indicators should be made explicit. And that is, it's really not a good HR practice to make evaluations based on whatever the LSC holds in their brain and not let the principal know in a very clear way what it is and how it will be weighted. So, we can certainly go ahead with just what is there. And I certainly also, as an LSC member and a parent, want to know the goals and the priorities of, the school leadership. So it is really, though, because you have the veto on this, it's up to you whether you think it's worthwhile to put more time in going forward. So if, that I think is something to keep in mind. And whether you would like to develop something like either one of these sample goals that we talked about tonight as additional indicators, let us know that. We can certainly we could have an initial discussion next week at the LSC and then have a very quick special meeting to, finalize things. If you could have a draft next week, but if this is not something you want to go forward with, do let us know, because there is a lot of work on everyone's plates. And I think we should just be realistic about what, everyone's personal priorities are on this.
Well, and I agree with you, but I also think we already do have goals that we have set as part of our MFT plan, which I'll be, of course, presenting more information to the LSC next week and sharing with you what we've shared with faculty. And to some small degree, we've shared with the school family. So yeah, there are goals there, and there are goals that we're going to be moving forward with, whether it falls under the MFT funding that we have and the availability of that, but also under the OST programming, which we'll be talking more about as well. So we have a good many good solid goals that are measurable and are ones that we can look at and say, did we accomplish this? Did they accomplish what we wanted them to do? I think we have a lot of that in place already. So if we want to make that maybe a little bit more explicit, that is just fine with me.
Go ahead, Raquel.
Thank you. Of course, I value all of these steps when it comes to the hiring process, but have you all considered, having this in the principal evaluation as feedback as opposed to an additional indicator? My concern is, holding someone responsible for the pool of candidates available and for why people leave, because honestly, that's people's own business why they leave. So yeah, have you all considered that as opposed to having this as a additional indicator? Just putting this as feedback so that it's there. When you do things like that, then the following year when the principal evaluation is done, the next group of people or the same group of people are able to read whatever you enter into the system.
Yeah, if the school is doing something like exit interviews and, like I wouldn't breach confidentiality, I think that would be great documents and data for the LSC to have as they work on compiling evidence for these competencies and key behaviors. So we can certainly add that to the list of data and documents that we request. And I'd be happy to do that. Yes, so this is basically, I think this is in your court now, Dr. Powers, if you want to draft an additional indicator that would, works with the goals that you have set and you and your team have set, please do that. And I think have it drafted for the LSC so that if there's initial questions that anyone has, we can ask them next week. And then we can, based on that, if both groups are amenable, we can either vote on it on the spot, or if we have to have a quick special meeting later in October, we could do that too. So basically, this is up to you if you want to draft something that is relevant to what you're working on and see if it works for the whole LSC. Michelle?
Yeah, sorry, my connection was spotty before, so sorry if I missed something. And also, please correct me if my understanding is not on spot, but from what I get, this is where my question is coming from. So the areas that are being brought up from the different discussions and stuff, I guess, from what I understand that you guys said regarding the evaluation, that you want to include these things because it's what the school is prioritizing, but each year we're prioritizing different things. And it's not that things are put to the wayside or, they're still on the forefront, but is this opening up like the precedent where each year then we're going to add more evaluation terms, I guess, that, like where it's more another 5%, or do you reduce it to add more? I don't know what the process is for removing the evaluation terms once they're added, like how that works. And then if this is the case and it's, if that's going to make things complex, wouldn't it be better to include in those other areas that people have mentioned where it's, like a part of it already, I guess, is my question, if that makes sense. Sorry.
Yeah, so the additional indicator process basically has to be done each year. If it's something that, the school likes to have as a focus, like if you have an arts program and you want something related to that every year, then it's probably something that the LSC will say, hey, should we put this in again? And you can recycle it. But if it's a very time sensitive priority, then it would just be added for 1 year. So it's not really, it just sets the precedent that like, oh, we've done this before, so we know the process, and would have a data point of like, this worked well, this didn't work well. But it does not actually mean that it's just like permanently as a part of the principal evaluation process for the school or for the LSC. So,
Okay. So
yeah,
each year,
it's a 1 year thing. Yeah.
Each year is voted upon as to what would be added or taken away, and it's not permanent, ongoing. Okay. Can I ask another question then? If these things do go through, when I see like the evaluation things like the 4, 3, 2, 1, it's on one of my tabs there, but that we strongly agree, disagree, etc. I guess as a teacher thinking, well, what are those parameters? Like, what do those lay out? What does that mean? Like, how are you going to determine if it's agree or disagree? Like, if you're giving like a rubric, like how do you evaluate that? But I don't know if that's better or not. Like, it's just an idea of making it less subjective, I guess, so that we know like what is being evaluated possibly. It's just something I'm throwing out. I don't know if that's how to say productive or not, but just questioning.
Yeah, I mean, so that like the description of the competencies and the key behaviors and that scale, which is not quite scale because there's no neutral point in the middle, that is all just like given to us by CPS. And it's kind of not, it's not ideal in some ways. But I think they do have some rubrics because in some cases, network chiefs evaluate principals. And so they actually have a little bit of that, but for some reason, they do not share this with LSCs generally. So, just it depends like how informed your LSC is and, the individual process that your LSC takes on in order to decide those things. So there is a fair amount left up to the LSC. And it is an area where, in general, CPS does not do a great job training LSC members on principal evaluation and, even providing, say, rubrics for these categories. They really do not do that for LSC members, which they should. So, that's unfortunately something really needs to be taken up at a district level. And it's sort of part of the overall lack of support for LSCs generally from CPS because they don't actually like empowered LSCs. And, there's just been a general undermining of LSC authority and support, unfortunately kind of from the start, it really sort of tapered off. And that's a big issue. So yeah, that is a very good point. And yeah, sort of bigger than the scope of one school's LSC. Go ahead, Dr. Powers.
I don't seem to have a hand raised button over here. I don't know why.
It's all hidden now under reaction.
All hidden now, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go looking for it. The one thing just to mention too, with regard to Cassie, you mentioned network chiefs and their evaluative role. That certainly is true outside of the ISP schools. And Jones is, well, I'm not tooting my own horn on this. It's based on the principal more than the school itself, because there's some excellent schools whose principals are fairly new and are not considered part of the ISP programming. But Jones was one of the first 25 schools in CPS selected for that process. And again, as a result, we have a little less compliance on things, but most of the key things are still in place. But the network chief does not do an evaluation. Instead, we do peer evaluations. We work, in my case, I work with two other colleagues, and we mutually evaluate each other based on our observations, conversations, and so forth. And that's for our own internal use and our own improvement goals, setting our own goals for improvement, which we do within that process as well. So that does not actually involve the LSC, just as an FYI is how that works.
Thanks. So I think we have covered our agenda, and Sarah can share the minutes when she's ready. It's not quite as formal of a minute process as it is with the LSC. And hopefully everyone spoke who wanted to speak. We have public participation if there's any last comments. And I think if not, I think we can adjourn.
One last item, and that is I'll get back to you prior to next week's meeting to let you know what direction we'd like to go on this.
Great, we will put it on as an agenda item and we can modify the agenda on Tuesday if we need to, if it is not needed. So.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good evening, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.